days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." So when the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself, alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." And the disciples asked him, "Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" He replied, "Elijah is indeed coming and will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come." And they did not recognize him, but they did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man is about to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So this morning's passage is what's known as the Transfiguration. That's a big fancy word that you can drop into a party the next time you want to sound like you really know something. And so today is Transfiguration Sunday. It's an important Sunday. It sits right at a transitional moment. It's the end of Epiphany, right? So we have Christmas, and then we have what we call the season of Epiphany. We've been in that for about 2 months. This is one of the longest times of Epiphany we can have because Easter's so big this year. Then we have Transfiguration Sunday, which sits as it's alone by itself, as a transitional sort of day. And then we go into Lent this week with the beginning of Ash Wednesday that will lead us all the way to Palm Sunday and Holy Week and into Easter and Resurrection and then the season of Easter. So Transfiguration is a very important Sunday, and it's a very important story because it's also a moment of transition in each of the Gospels. Because of editing for my sermon and wanting to be mindful of how long you might be willing to sit here today, I cannot do everything justice to the scripture, but it's important to me that you understand the conversation that he's having at the end about Elijah. So I typed up a little thing that says it's floating around, says sermon notes. If you didn't get a copy, there should be some sitting out there. If you don't get a copy, let me know. I'll print one out for you. And I explained in a couple of paragraphs what's happening in that section. It's important, but it just couldn't be included in the sermon this morning. So will you pray with me? Wondrous God, we give you thanks for this time that we have with you, for this time that we've gathered together with our family of faith, these people that lift us up, that inspire us, that support us in our moments of challenge and praise with us in our moments of joy. We just thank you that we could be with you, that we could be with these people, that we can do it freely. If you'll bless us this morning, that we can do it safely, that we can know this is a place that we come to find you. For that's what we're really seeking, your words, God, your message, your songs, conversation with you through prayer today. Bless this time as we review your word. May it move our hearts and minds. May it show us the discipleship path that you want us to walk this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So this transfiguration moment, which is what the word we use because Jesus sort of transforms in this moment, right? He goes up the mountain, normal-looking human being. At the top of the mountain, glows bright white for a moment, which I will come back to, then goes back to being normal guy, back down the mountain. So that transfiguration at the moment, because I don't know about you all, but I've never glowed bright as the sun. Anybody else here? No. Okay, so this is unique to Jesus as far as we know. All right, so keeping in mind, so here's what's really amazing. So first of all, this is a story that appears in all 4 Gospels, and it plays what I would call an integral moment in each of the Gospels. So let me help you understand where we are in the life of Jesus Christ. Okay, so born as a baby, and then somewhere around 28 or 30 years goes by, we believe that when we get to the story that I covered in January about Jesus being baptized, that he's in his late 20s or early 30s. He's somewhere around that age. You know, birthdays and calendars weren't exactly the same, so it's tough for us to know exactly. That's our best guess. And so around the age of in the late 20s, early 30s, we have that baptismal moment. Okay, and if you weren't able to be here, let me review it very briefly. So Jesus goes to John the Baptist. He says, I want to be baptized. They bring him into the river of Jordan. And as John is lifting Jesus back up out of the water, the heavens open, light flows down, the Holy Spirit descends in the shape of a dove, and a voice booms from the sky, "This is my son, my beloved, with him I am well pleased," which is sort of a unique baptism, because I don't know about you all, but I've never had that happen when I baptize anybody. So, and so that's like, and what we know is that's the moment that Jesus' ministry really starts. And I'm not saying he didn't do anything up until that moment, but that's what we call like his public ministry. He starts to travel, he starts to do the speeches, he starts to do the teaching in the synagogues. There's really no evidence that he did that before that moment. And in fact, that moment is where the Gospel of Mark and basically where the Gospel of John actually starts. There's no birth stories in those 2 Gospels. So you have the beginning of something. And so now, where we are today, somewhere around 3 years has gone by. Again, we do our best guess. But he's been doing his ministry for several years now. People are starting to know who he is. They're starting to have a glimpse of his message. Many people have witnessed his miracles. Okay? And in the passages right before this, which is always important to know, whenever you're reading a Bible passage, it's always important to know where does it fall in the story. What happens just before? What happens just after? Just before this, there are 2 really important passages that for those of you that have been lifelong church folks, these will ring bells, and for those of you that haven't, don't worry, you can learn today. There's a moment where Jesus says to his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And they kind of go back and forth and have this conversation. And finally, Simon Peter, says to him, "You are the Messiah." It's the first moment in Matthew's gospel that a human being recognizes and declares Jesus Christ to be the Messiah. All right, so in this moment, that's 2 passages before the one for today, is this really important recognition that Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. He is the one come to save the world. And then right on the heels of that conversation, Jesus says to them, and you need to know that in order to fulfill that, I'm paraphrasing, in order to fulfill that, I will suffer at the hands of men and I will die. That is not their vision of a Messiah. Messiah is supposed to be a mighty conqueror. He's supposed to lead an amazing uprising. He's supposed to set the Jews of the day free. They're supposed to no longer be the slaves of any occupying nation. That's what they're expecting. So here's this unbelievable moment where they finally say, "We believe you. We've been watching you. We've been with you for 3 years. We see what you can do. You're it, man. We know you're it." And he says, "Yes, I am. And I'm going to die." And I'm like, whoa. And then we come to the passage for today. So knowing that this is happening as the conversation of what does it mean to be Messiah and how is Jesus going to live into that is happening. So there's this, so try to put yourselves, it's really hard because we know the whole story, right? But try to put yourselves in the place of the disciples and imagine this push-pull that you would be feeling because you've been raised your whole life long to believe one understanding of Messiah. And then you've been traveling with Jesus. And it's just been this unbelievable time of life. You've seen things that you never even thought a person would ever witness. And you've heard him say things that just resonate with your heart and challenge you to be a person of God in a whole different way. And you're there. And then he says, "I'm going to die." And you're like, like that can't be. And so now they've almost sort of taken like a step backwards. Well, then how do I mean, if you're going to claim it, you're going to die. I mean, that's not the vision of the Messiah. How do I know you're the Messiah now? Now that you've told me this, now you're really asking me to do something weird. So he takes 3 disciples. It's the only time that I could think of, so I could be wrong. I'm always ready to be wrong. But it's the only time I could think of this week where he sort of breaks up the disciples like that and only takes 3 of them with him. So he takes Peter, James, and James's brother John. All right, now Simon Peter has just been declared the rock. All right, when he says the whole Messiah conversation, Jesus says to him, "You're my rock, I'm going to build my church upon you." And James and John, their nickname are the Sons of Thunder. Isn't that a great name? I always wanted to be a daughter of thunder. Like, wouldn't that be so cool? Like, here comes Pastor Amanda, daughter of thunder! Right? Like, because that's the image it brings. They're the Sons of Thunder. These are not quiet, shy men. Right? Of all the disciples, I'm sure there was a wide variety of gifts, a wide variety of personalities. There had to be some introverts in the group. These are not it. All right? This is Peter, who almost always speaks, sometimes without thinking. All right? But he's the rock. He's the guy that will say it first. And then the Sons of Thunder. These are the guys that they put their opinions out there. So Jesus knows, has to know, that following his death and resurrection, these are going to be 3 of the men that are going to be telling these stories. And I want you to think about this for a second, because really when you just think about this from a human perspective, when we know of history, it's really amazing. There are 3 witnesses to this moment. 3 people saw this happen. And I'm telling you this story 2,000 years later. Try to think of another story in your mind that only 3 people were witness to that survived for thousands of years. There aren't that many stories like that where there's only a couple, and usually they're relegated to, well, maybe this happened. This is one that, this is. So that's a pretty amazing thing. So Peter, James, and John, they go up the mountain with Jesus. We have no indication of what he told them going up the mountain, so I have no idea what he said other than, like, let's go for a hike. I don't know. So he gets them to the top of the mountain, and then this moment that you really close your eyes. Don't go to sleep, but close your eyes. I can see you. Some of you don't have your eyes closed. Close your eyes. You're at the top of a mountain. Nice view, a breeze. Some of you are trying to catch your breath because hiking isn't what it once was. And Jesus is standing just a bit higher than you on the peak. And you look up at him. Maybe you go to say something to him. And all of a sudden, you can hardly look at him because he is so bright. As bright as trying to stare into the sun, except instead of the sun being millions of light years away, it's standing 20 feet from you. And his clothes are such a brilliant white, you almost can't describe them as clothing. They are like pure light on his body. And as you're trying to blink, and as you're trying to wrap your mind around this, next to him appear Moses and Elijah. And I'm not sure that you would have ever, it's not like there are snapshots of these guys, but somehow in your heart, you instantly know who these men are. And they stand there for a moment. And then you look back, and it's just Jesus as he was a few moments ago. All right, open your eyes. Wake up if you've gone to sleep. Can you imagine? So this is not the first time that the full divinity of God has been described in terms of light. So if you will remember the stories from the Old Testament, when Moses goes up the mountain, we like mountains. God always likes to talk to people on mountains. So when Moses goes up the mountain and is given the 10 Commandments, he spends 40 days on the mountain talking to a cloud that is the form, and it's a bright cloud. And there are stories in the Old Testament when he came down, the people were horrified by his appearance because he appeared as though sunburned. So close was he to the brightness of God that it changed the tint of his skin. He had a tan and a sunburn that nobody would have from just normal exposure to the sun. It was something they were freaked, so much so that there are stories in the Old Testament where Moses, when he comes down, will cover his face so that they will listen to his words without being distracted by his appearance. That is some bright, bright light, my friends. And so in this moment, Jesus is sort of revealing his full divinity. I'm not just a man, is basically what and he's not saying it. He's just showing them when I let my divinity out, when I don't contain it, when I embody the full divinity that I am, oh, and I forgot. That's right too. Oh, the booming voice from the sky, as if we needed more. The booming voice from the sky that says, and these words should sound familiar, "This is my son, with whom I am well pleased." And then God adds a little piece on the end that we're going to talk about more in a minute that says, "Listen to him." Peter has this moment when Moses and Elijah and Jesus, and he says to them, "Let me build you little huts." Sometimes it's transformed as booths or little houses. And it always confuses us because we're like, what? Why is he going to build houses at the top of this mountain? Like, what in the world is going through Peter's mind? You have to remember, in their time frame, there had to be an actual space set aside for God to come and dwell in. Right? That's what the temple is. The temple is a space on earth for God to come and dwell in. And so in Peter's mind, this is an amazing moment. This is something, in his mind, I think he wants to be able to just march one person after the other up the mountain. Come look at Jesus. Come meet and witness Elijah and Moses. Come see, put on your sunglasses, or whatever the first century version of sunglasses is, because, just come on up. And so he wants to stay at the mountaintop, and he wants Jesus in this form, and Moses and Elijah to stay with him. So in his mind, I'm going to build you some little huts, these little booths or houses, and then you can come dwell in it anytime we call upon you. So Peter has this vision that I can come up the mountain and say, "Yo, Moses, what's up?" And Moses in a little house. Right? And so once we understand that that's his thinking, that really makes sense. Because wouldn't you want to stay on the mountaintop? Jesus has just told you he's going to suffer. That if they go to Jerusalem, and he specifically mentions Jerusalem when he talks to them, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to suffer, and I'm going to die. Who wants to make that trip? Why would Peter be invested? We don't need Jesus. Let's just not even do that. This is cool. You're powerful. Let me build little houses, and we'll just stay here on the mountaintop. And Jesus sort of reins the divinity back in, appears again as just an average one of us, and says to him, "Do not be afraid." And they go back down the mountain. It's really a powerful moment because as he walks back down that mountain, it's not exactly a direct route, but if you think of it in terms of the story of the gospel, from that moment forward, he is walking to Jerusalem. And he will get to Jerusalem, and he will suffer, and he will die. From the moment he goes back down this mountain, he is yielding the power of his divinity. He is not going to use that power to save himself. He has yielded it and has willingly accepted the direction that he has to go in. There's no turning back after this moment, really. That's why it's such an important moment in the gospel. And if you've never read the whole thing straight through, which I know many of us don't really sit around and do that, it's hard to know how important, how big this moment is. Plus, it's so big as they're going back down the mountain, he actually says to Peter, James, and John, "Don't tell anybody about this until after I'm dead." Can you imagine that one? Like, they're going to go hang out with their buddies. He's not saying, don't tell the Pharisees, tell no one, not even the other disciples. Can you imagine trying to hold that one in? You just had the most amazing experience of your life, and you're supposed to go back down that mountain and not tell anybody about it? But Jesus knows these three guys are going to talk about it post-resurrection. He knows that. He knows they're going to have their own screw-ups, and they're going to have their own challenges and their own moments of doubt because they are human, and there's nothing we can do about that. But he also has full confidence in them that when the time comes, they will tell this story, and it will not be forgotten. And we have proof, because here I am, 2,000 years later, preaching to you about it. So it's a hugely important story just because it helps us really understand who Jesus Christ was. And it helps us really understand who Jesus Christ is. What it means for him to be Savior. What he really gave. What a choice that was. People tend to think that just because it happened and because Christ did it willingly, that it means he didn't have a choice to do it differently. That's such a wrong thing. Of course he had a choice. Of course he did. He had all the power of God. He didn't have to be crucified for us. He chose. And it's so important to know that because it's such a huge choice of love. That he chose it. He wasn't stuck doing it. There wasn't no other path. He could have been like, you know what? That sounds good, Peter. Build me a house. I'll hang up here on the mountainside and I'll glow. And it'll be like a cool star on the mountainside and people can come visit. Maybe one day, 2,000 years from now, we'll charge admission and make a lot of money about it. He didn't do that. He reigned his divinity. Think about that. Think about what it would be like to have that kind of power and then shed it from yourself. Choose not to use it for yourself, but in order to save everyone else. This is who Jesus Christ is. But I also like to think about this story from the perspective of the disciples because I think there's a secondary message. For those of us who are the followers of Christ, we all have mountaintop moments. Maybe not quite like this one. But there are moments in our lives where the view is so beautiful and the moment is so full of joy, and and there's such a huge moments in our lives that we know that our lives were different after that moment than before that moment. I don't know what they're different for everybody. Maybe it was a trip you took, or when you met your spouse or your life partner. Maybe it was a child being born. For me, one of my mountaintop moments is the day I was ordained. It changed who I was, and I just think, just what it felt like in that moment. But here's the reality: we can't live on mountaintop. Our lives have mountaintop moments, so that we understand the purpose of the climbs and the valleys, so that we can be inspired as Jesus was to go back down the mountain. Because the reality is, we live very small parts of our lives on mountaintop. Think about that. Picture your life. And tell me how often you're just sitting at the top, looking out, going, this is awesome. I would imagine most of you can think of at least one moment like that, but tell me that you can't think of 1,000 moments when you felt like you were trying to run down this hill so fast that you're going to lose your footing and roll head over feet, which is what I tend to do when I'm hiking down. Tell me that you can't think of 1,000 moments where you felt like you were climbing to a mythological peak that people kept telling you was worth climbing to. I promise you, it's pretty from the top. I promise you, come take the pretty picture. And you're like, forget it. I'm going to sit here and have a heart attack and die. I'm done. Because the climb was so hard, you literally couldn't even imagine that there was a mountaintop, much less what it might feel like to finally get to it. And tell me that you can't think of dozens of times where you have just been in the valley. You don't even have it in you to climb. You're just trying to recover from the downhill tumble that life just handed you. And you're bruised, and you're hurt, and you're just trying to heal. Heal enough, spiritually, physically, emotionally, to be willing to even leave your house again, much less hike back up the mountain in the hope that the next mountaintop will come. You can't stay on the mountaintop. Life is lived. Down and in the valley and up again. But we also can't live in the valleys. That's not where Jesus leaves us. If you think of it in the terms of Jesus' life, his down into the valley is this horrid path of betrayal and denial and physical abuse at the hands of the Romans. And his valley moment is being nailed to a cross, a painful, executed death. He doesn't leave us in the valley. That's not the end of the story. And in fact, it's one of the most rapid ascensions to a mountaintop that we've ever seen when we go from death to resurrection. Boom! And what Jesus does in that moment is he promises us there will come a day where you do get to stay at the mountaintop. There will come a time, my friends, where there will be no more hills or valleys for you to go up and down. There will be no more hurt. There will be no more pain. I promise there will come a time where it's just mountaintop from then on out. But in the meantime, you're my disciples. If you want to be my disciples, you have to pick up your cross and you have to follow me. And I'm going to try to give you some mountaintop moments because I don't want you to lose hope, and I don't want you to lose faith, and I want you to know that I love you. And by golly, maybe this story today that I'm telling you will be the only mountaintop you even get to experience. Maybe you won't feel them in your lives. So I'm giving you one from history so that you will know there was the mountaintop of all mountaintop moments. But even I, the Son of God, could not stay there. I had to endure the rest of life so the resurrection could be mine. And so the resurrection could be yours. Transfiguration Sunday. A turning point in the gospel. A moment of choice and commitment for Jesus Christ. And an instruction from God for all of us that would ever hear hear that story from the Rock and the Sons of Thunder for thousands upon thousands of years. This is my son, my beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. He doesn't say be like him, copy him, think like him, follow him. Of all the words that God could have chose in that moment, he says, listen to him. Listen to the words. Hear what my son is telling you. Hear it. Take it into your very heart, into your very soul. Let his words and his actions that flow from his words transform you so that he is my word. He is my word. He is the living, breathing embodiment of my word. Listen to that word. Listen to it and then live like it. Live like it so that you can come dwell on the mountaintop with me. This is my son, my beloved. With him I am well pleased. Will you listen to him? Amen.
Amen.